All right, guys, I have Michael Naft in the virtual building today. He is fresh, and I mean fresh, out of the Emergency Board of Commissioners meetings where they discussed the reopening strategy for phase one in Las Vegas. So, Michael, I want to thank you for coming on the show today. It's such an honor to have somebody of your status here, and this helps me build credibility for this platform for all of the bright personalities in Las Vegas to come. And so, first and foremost, how is Michael Naft doing?
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, Jake, and thank you for doing this. I think it's a public service to bring people together and have these conversations that you're having. And congratulations on your first few weeks. Sounds like you've been very busy, and I appreciate that. I look forward to your continued success. And to answer your question, I've been doing fine. Mostly, all of the work we're doing is revolving around both the health response from the medical perspective, and now hopefully moving into the economic response. And from the county's perspective, both those tracks have been happening simultaneously since the pandemic began about 7 weeks ago here in our community.
Yeah, it's been definitely an interesting time, especially in Vegas, being probably the hardest hit city within the country.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're right. I think we will, and that's going to be a long story yet to be told, is the economic damage the pandemic's done to our community here. We're not like other metropolitan areas that are a little bit more diversified or have, say, an area that has manufacturing. The machines might turn off, but when they turn back on, there's going to be customer base. We're going to have to do a lot of work here to make sure people understand that it's safe and then make them feel comfortable coming back, returning to Southern Nevada.
And I applaud you guys. You guys have done an outstanding job. And before we get into, I'm sure, what everyone wants to hear around COVID and everything related, I believe that people's backstory is just as important as their story going forward. So for the listeners and myself, can you give us like a brief 2-minute description of who Michael Naft is growing up in Vegas and leading up to becoming the Clark County Commissioner?
Well, absolutely. And thank you for asking. That's awfully nice of you. I grew up in this community. I went to Thorpe, Treen, Thurman White, Las Vegas Academy downtown, and then UNLV. I know we're fraternity brothers in Alpha Epsilon Pi together, and which I think is a wonderful foundation for any type of field you want to go into. But I think those types of social groups and fraternity, sorority organizations do a lot to help people with networking, of course, but also really their leadership training models. And I appreciate the fraternity for doing that for me. So I grew up here. For the last 13 years, I worked for Congresswoman Dina Titus. She represents Nevada's 1st Congressional District. And my background, I'm fortunate to have been able to sort of cover the full spectrum of politics and government. I started out even in high school working on campaigns and working in politics. And then after about 6 years of doing that professionally, I was finance director on a variety of different races, including the Congresswoman's first 3 House races, and her governor's race in 2006. And then after, like I said, about 6 years of doing that, she asked if I would serve as her district director for the 1st Congressional District, which I was proud to do for the last 6 years. And that job is largely a customer service job. It's how can the state office of a member of Congress help individuals navigate the federal government. So there's literally thousands of agencies and departments within the government. And oftentimes people need a little bit of help understanding either the resources that are available to them, some of the programs that might be available to them. So I worked with her to make sure that she had the best constituent service and outreach operation possible. And I feel very fortunate and humbled to be asked to serve in this role by now Governor Steve Sisolak. He and I worked together when he was on the Clark County Commission. He was chairman for the last 6 years and represented District A for 10 years. And then when he was elected governor, he was in a unique position to actually replace his successor. So the governor, if there's a vacancy on the county commission, the governor appoints the replacement to the balance of the term. So it's particularly a particular honor that he would ask me to serve because he really, I believe, knew what it takes to do the job well, since he did it for a decade. So he asked me to do that, and on January 4th of last year, I was sworn in as the commissioner from District A. And there were a couple things he asked of me, but one of the big ones was that I would run to retain the seat when the time came. And that's happening right now. So I'm glad to be on the campaign trail, virtually, of course, making sure that people know what I stand for and some of the work we've done in the last year and a half, and look forward to hopefully winning the nomination and the primary in June, and then go on to hopefully retain the seat in November.
So it seems like your line or your track to politics was almost cemented since you were younger. It seems that now in politics, especially with like the most recent election, it seems like people's path to politics seems to be a little bit more eccentric than your
Well, you're
general
right.
tenure.
It's sort of the time when there's not a whole lot of professionals that you would want to go to that had no experience in their field. Nobody wants a surgeon who's never performed surgery, but yet there seems to be an appeal in modern politics, to have sort of that fresh face. I think while I am on the younger end, I'm tied for the fifth youngest county commissioner in Clark County history. So while I am younger, I do have a wide breadth of experience that I think really has helped me every single day I've been in this job, both in the federal role that I had, and then just as a advocate and the outreach work I've done throughout our community. So I do think that's important.
Yeah, young but definitely experienced. So my question is, like, what exactly is a Clark County commissioner? I know what an NFL commissioner does. I know what Roger Goodell does, but I'm not really sure what
I don't have those kinds of powers.
But I'm not exactly sure what a Clark County commissioner does. Can you help explain?
It's a great question, and I always have to preface it by saying Clark County is extremely unique. So county to county, you have some variation. But what makes Clark County unique is the huge percentage of the county of Southern Nevada that's considered unincorporated. So whereas most places, the county commission strictly does what's considered to be regional services, here in Clark County, we're performing those regional services like every county does for about 2.3 million people. But there are 1 million people who live in the unincorporated portion of Southern Nevada. And for them, they don't have a city councilor and a mayor and a county commissioner. They are solely represented by their county commissioner. So we perform for those 1 million people all the municipal services of a city government. So while a lot of people think because their mailing address says Las Vegas that they live in the city of Las Vegas, very few of them actually do. The city of Las Vegas has about 600,000 people compared to if unincorporated Clark County were a city, we'd have a population of 1 million. So some of those regional services that we perform are a lot of the things that you might not think about on a day-to-day basis, but you certainly utilize every day. Things like when you turn on the faucet, where does the water come from? That's the Southern Nevada Water District and the Las Vegas Valley Water District. And then when you flush the toilet, where does the water go? That's called reclamation, and we manage the county's water reclamation program. Those are critical infrastructure programs that if we went without would sorely be missed. And then, of course, we do, as the regional provider, we are the main entity responsible for social services. So these are things like our foster care system and adoptions. They're things like our helping assist our homeless population and our most vulnerable among us. And then we also operate in our unincorporated sections. Some of the municipal services that we offer are things like the Metropolitan Police Department. We actually share that responsibility with the city. So we fund 64% of Metro and the city funds the balance. We have our own fire department, the Clark County Fire Department. They are entirely county driven, and they service the unincorporated portion of the valley. And then we do things like public works. That's your roadways, maintaining all public right-of-ways. We have about 6,000 miles of roadway that we tend to within Clark County through our public works team. So that's an incredibly massive undertaking. It's one of our bigger departments. And then we also do through the municipal piece of what we do in the unincorporated sections, we do what's called comprehensive planning and zoning. So if somebody wants to, something as basic as lift the cinder block in their backyard a foot or two, that comes through the county. Or if they want to build a new subdivisions of homes, that comes through Clark County. And what makes my job in particular really interesting is the makeup of District A, which I represent. The district goes from Flamingo Road all the way to the California and Arizona borders. It goes west as far as Durango, and it goes east as far as Easter. So you think about the makeup of that area. I have 5 townships in my district. Those are all unincorporated townships. So you might have heard of Paradise, Spring Valley, Enterprise, and Laughlin and Searchlight are not cities. They're both unincorporated townships, which I represent. And then I represent the only incorporated section of my district is the city of Henderson. I have neighborhoods like Inspirata in the city of Henderson, Anthem, and Seven Hills. And then the vast majority of my district, a little over 85%, is unincorporated. So you can imagine the makeup of the district really dictates a lot of the role in the portfolio of the job. And then I'd also say the variety of individuals who live within District A really make the job interesting. You can imagine the kind of socioeconomic and the needs of individuals who might live and work at the 215 in Flamingo, or the I-15 in Flamingo, or Searchlight, or Laughlin. And the needs are all over the spectrum. So making sure that we're accountable, no matter where you fall on that spectrum, making sure we're accountable and responsive is certainly been my priority.
Wow. So you guys are almost like, you're like the meta infrastructure of Las Vegas. And then
that's a good way to put it. And I should have mentioned some of the major things that I didn't even mention. We own and operate 5 airports, including the 9th busiest airport in the country, McCarran Airport. We own and operate the state's busiest hospital in UMC. So as members of the county commission, we also serve as a member of the board of directors of UMC and some of these other entities within Clark County.
Man, you're literally like the Swiss Army knife of the Clark County commissioners, just covering it all.
You could really see that full spectrum of service, and you're right. It definitely makes the job interesting and rewarding.
Man, that gave me a headache just thinking about that. So how has your position changed, I guess, since this pandemic has happened? Because obviously that's a lot to cover. And then with this dire circumstance coming, you probably have to shift your focus into more relative situations.
Yeah, well, we were certainly in a financially, the county was in a much different place 8 weeks ago. Some of the priorities that we were looking at addressing were costly, and some of the capital improvements we were looking at doing, obviously that has entirely been shifted. Anything that was not budgeted or had already been expensed has been put on hold. And all of our focus has been initially on the health and welfare, the well-being of the individuals who live in Clark County, making sure that we're doing our role through UMC, through Metro and Fire, and through the Southern Nevada Health District to really flatten the curve was the main priority. But simultaneously, we clearly knew both internally to the county and throughout our community the financial burden is going to be long lasting from this. We are so dependent on travel, and not just domestic travel, but international travel. And now we're looking at possible routes not being reinstated until October, November. McCarran Airport, which as I mentioned, we own and operate, we went from seeing 128,000 people walk through those doors every single day to seeing less than 1,000. And it's going to be a little bit of time before people feel comfortable traveling the way they used to. And we're going to have to be creative about how we deal with that. So the job really has shifted in that it's all about the response to COVID. That's been the priority from those two perspectives. And now, as you mentioned, we were in an emergency hearing today where we discussed the governor's phase-out plan, the roadmap to recovery. The county is very supportive of that, of the policies laid out in that plan, and will both support and enforce them. It's our responsibility. We have the oversight role to enforce any policies, directives from the state. So we'll be doing that at a local level through our business licensing department and through Metro and any other tools at our disposal. But again, it's that working both sides of this crisis. You're working the triage side and then the long-term economic impact that we're going to be facing here. And like I mentioned, it's a struggle internally as well. Nobody would ever anticipate that the faucet would have been turned off entirely overnight. And that's really what happened here. We're largely dependent on sales tax, which is not the most stable form of revenue, as we're clearly seeing. And unfortunately, we don't quite have the diversity yet, particularly in Southern Nevada, to allow for an entire industry being turned off so abruptly. So there's going to be some very difficult choices coming from the county perspective. We're working very closely with our employees. We have over 10,000 employees at Clark County who make up all the different entities and departments and agencies. So making sure that that their health is looked out for, that we're providing a safe work environment for so many of them, a lot of whom are first responders through fire, law enforcement, the nurses at UMC. So making sure that we're providing the appropriate protective gear and that we're providing a safe workspace is really important as we sort of return to regular service. That's going to be a priority that we continue.
Yeah, it seemed like just as Vegas was beginning to get off the reliance from the Strip, we had sports coming and different injuries surrounding it, this drastic impact just shut it down, and now it just showed that like gaping hole and reliance on the Strip as we were trying to build ourselves out of it. And so as you said earlier, and according to the signs outside my complex, you're running for re-election and trying to balance 5 different unincorporated, incorporated counties, and as well as the COVID, economic, public sector. How has this changed your campaign and I guess all of the campaigns in totality?
Well, that's a good question, and studies will be done and books will be written about that in the following months and years, I'm sure. But no doubt, I would have been extremely active in large group settings right now. I do a lot of, I've always done, just because I see it as sort of my role is to outreach to the community. So I've always done on a weekly basis multiple outreach style events. So every Saturday I was doing coffee and conversations in every part of my district for the last year and a half. So those have largely gone virtual. On the official side, through my county office, we continue to do briefings and meetings virtually every single day, all day. And then on the campaign side, next week alone, I'm doing 4 virtual house parties. So Tuesday through Friday night, we're going to get together, invite people to pull up in front of their laptop or their iPhone tablet with a glass of wine and join us for some virtual house parties. Normally, I'd be in people's living rooms talking about my priorities for the county and how I see things moving forward. But now it'll be in that setting. And then also, whereas we would have been knocking on doors and talking to people face to face through a field program, we're depending a lot to communicate my message through mail, more so than we would otherwise. And then, of course, telephone.
Yeah. And so what is your initiative, going forward in this campaign?
The most important thing is going to have to be, how can we make sure that all the businesses, particularly for my concern in District A, but throughout our valley, are in a position to succeed. So we've already looked at how can we either relax some ordinances that have been put in place tweak them so that they make more sense for the current needs. I'll give you an example. A resort on the Strip, technically, since they will, when they reopen, and hopefully phase 2, they will not be opening, as an example, with a spa. Well, in order to be classified as a resort, you have to have a spa. So you'd hate to all of a sudden have these hotels not be in compliance with county law. So we're correcting some of those things to make sense for the time, and we're being extremely available to our businesses, big and small. I may have mentioned I've got 12,414 businesses in District A alone, and that's out of about 44,000. So almost a little more than a quarter of the businesses in Clark County are in the district I represent. So it's going to be really important that we are helping them navigate, helping them take advantage of all the programs that are available to them. We're certainly working closely with our federal congressional delegation in advocating for assistance to our smaller businesses. There's been some which has been helpful. We'd like to see some more. And making sure that from our perspective, how are we making it as easy as possible while being safe to proceed as you need to.
Yeah, and in the middle of this pandemic, it seems like every day there's some new situation that arises. So it's literally evolving on the go. And something too that I noticed a few weeks ago, when Carolyn Goodman was on CNN, she got a lot of flack. And outside of wherever your political beliefs are, something I saw on social media and people were trending was that she was elected with only 22,000 votes in last election. And now I haven't really paid attention to politics in general until recently, and especially local politics, because it doesn't really get as much publicity. Mm-hmm. Are local politics, do they usually have that low of a turnout?
No, so we had this odd dynamic in Nevada where, well, to put it in perspective, you're right. She was elected by 22,000 people. My predecessor was elected by 500,000 people. Okay. And one of the reasons is because it used to be, up until actually right now, that law changed in the last legislative session, but it used to be that municipal elections, so your mayors, your city councilors, and your local municipal judges, they were elected on what's called the off years, the odd years. So while say the last presidential election, this would have happened a year after. So turnout is very low. A lot of these races don't raise a lot of money, so that means they don't spend a lot of money getting the word out. And turnout historically is always low. Now that wasn't true with the county commission. The county commission was always aligned with the even year calendar. So whenever you have a traditional statewide races in November, that's when the election for county commission is. And so you tend to have a much higher turnout in those races. The other reason why that number you stated is so low is because the city of Las Vegas is a relatively small jurisdiction. By comparison, like I mentioned, 2.3 million people in Clark County and about 600,000 people in the city proper. A little more than half the size of just the unincorporated piece of Clark County. So the troubling part of that is, though, that the mayor of Las Vegas does get international recognition because of that title. Just because you and I know the fundamentals of and the quirky nature of the way our local government works, most people around the world certainly don't know that. Most people around the world assume that the Las Vegas Strip is in the city of Las Vegas, when in reality it is not, and the mayor has no jurisdiction over it. So I think there's been a little bit of education since her performance with Mr. Cooper on this subject, and that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, I think it definitely is, especially more importantly during this pandemic. The national politics get all of the recognition, but I think it's shown that these states have a lot more power than people realize, as the governors have pretty much been in charge of the entire plan going forward for their respective states. And so do you expect a higher turnout in the local and your election because of this?
Well, I think so. There's another dynamic at play too, which is, again, unique to our state, in that because we have a caucus system and not a primary, our presidential primary, so our preference for president within the party, has already happened. That happened through the caucus in February. So that tends to be a big driver. The other factor to consider this time is that there are no statewide races happening right now. You might in some years have either a Senate race or a governor's race. And then all of our House races, our race for the U.S. House of Representatives, they have some primaries, but no serious challenges. There's a Democrat incumbent in all three of the districts within Clark County in those House races, so they're not driving out a whole lot of turnout. So I'm certainly doing my part to make sure that my voters know how and when to vote. And I'm very curious to see how this all-mail ballot drives turnout. It might, because it makes it easier for a lot of people, the ballot's literally pre-postage paid sitting on your kitchen counter. You might be more inclined to sign it and stick it in the mailbox. Or perhaps some people will prefer the old way of going to a poll and voting. So I think that'll be what's studied in the future, and we'll know more in a couple months. But I'm anxious to see. I certainly would encourage people to vote because, like you said, local governments wield a whole lot of authority over the things that touch people's life on a daily basis. Things like libraries and things like the condition of your roads, your water, your sewer, and the way our communities develop, our public transit systems, and our law enforcement and crime prevention and first responders. These are all really important things, and they're all managed on the local level.
Yeah, I've said in some previous podcasts too, I think that this whole situation that's arises is going to be used as an accelerant towards pushing innovative technologies and new methods that need to come into play, whether it's mail-in voting. I'm personally a big crypto person, so I think blockchain voting should eventually be down the road. Like business meetings are now all virtual, and we're going to see a lot more changes. But
Jake, if I could, I think you are absolutely onto something. I think that's a great point, and I think it's really important right now that we are looking at some of the elements of what's going on in society right now to see what actually works, what makes us more productive, what we might want to maintain in the future. Maybe you're right. Maybe people will like this form of communicating and find that, hey, rather than spending 4 hours a day in a car driving from meeting to meeting, maybe this is a more efficient use of my time, and then I can spend that extra time with my family and friends. People may choose that over going back to sitting on the 15 in traffic. I don't know, but I think it's worth looking at. And certainly from the county's perspective, we are very closely paying attention to some of the deficiencies that we've had. We had to overnight go to an online submission process for a lot of our different departments. Our comprehensive planning department did a great job very quickly going electronic, as did our fire prevention and building department. And the county, actually the first item I ever put on the county agenda was to discuss the modernization of Clark County systems and technologies. And I had that agenda item with the intention of looking at this as an outreach tool and a customer service tool. We really, in order to be responsive in the modern age to people's needs, you have to have a presence online that's functional and allows people to communicate back and forth, to both receive information and submit information. And we were deficient in those areas. And so in many ways, this did sort of force us to move into the modern age.
Yeah, a lot of the traditional methods are becoming antiqued, and just like and people are turned off by it. Like, just for an example, you coming onto this podcast is showing the way that media and information is being consumed. And so, yeah, thank you for noticing that. And
yeah, I mean, and you also look, 80% or so of websites are viewed on this, not on the traditional screen, and making sure that, a website ought to be formatted for a mobile device. And these are all sort of tools that we can make life easier for people.
Yeah, I've actually FaceTime probably more in the last month than I have in the last 5 years.
Same.
Yeah, and so I guess we'll go into the big question I'm sure everyone wants to know, and that's what you were at today regarding the phased opening strategy for Vegas. And given that you said you had a close relationship with the governor, can you touch on your meeting today in phase one and maybe some insight on some of the phases going forward?
Well, sure, I'd be happy to. And first and foremost, I do want to applaud the governor for having the courage to listen to our medical community, to people who actually know what they're talking about on scientific matters. That it's kind of sad that you have to applaud that as a courageous act, but in today's age, it takes. I think it's warranted. Because it was sure difficult decision, and I know that weighed on him. He's a business person, and to have to shutter so many doors, so many independent people, so many people who, we sure hope they're going to survive, but they're going to need a lot of help once things do get back to business. So that was an incredibly difficult decision, and I think the way that he has chosen to move forward with the reopening reflects the advice and counsel that he's gotten from his medical committee. And it's a deliberate and slow process. Not everybody gets to open up right away, but I think it's a fair and equitable process. So small businesses get to open, just like large businesses in some cases had been able to stay open. So I think that's a lot more fair. You're limiting capacity at restaurants to 50%, which will be difficult for them, but we're encouraging them to continue doing curbside and utilize any other tools they might have to create revenue for their business. And then, there are some things that are not able to open yet. He and now the county commission agrees, we don't feel comfortable at this time opening casinos. We don't feel comfortable opening spas and massage facilities, places where it's very difficult to limit the human contact, even with protective gear. And then, of course, places where large crowds congregate, like nightclubs, as you're familiar with, and other showrooms, other establishments where you really can't do a proper job of crowd control or social distancing. And then the most important piece of all of this is that phase 2 is not time certain. I know people would love to have a magic date and time at which everything's going to get better, but that just wouldn't be practical and it wouldn't be honest. I think it's more reasonable to say this is a period where Nevadans have to continue to prove that they can do the right thing, that they can be smart about washing their hands, wearing face coverings when they're out in public, trying to limit their exposure, limit their time with large groups, and to say that, assuming everybody continues to play their role, that hopefully very soon we will be able to enter the next phase.
Yeah, my first 2 guests on the show were actually an ER nurse and an ICU nurse in the respiratory division who had one of the first COVID cases. And they talk about how, regardless of what people say, what your perceptions are, they have an outstanding rate of people coming in who are sick and dying, and that the statistics aren't always right because depending on the measures that you take going forward, the numbers may be lowered because of it. And those saved lives aren't actually a statistic that is counted on.
I think you're right, and there's no doubt that the people on the front line have a slightly different perspective than some of us who have the luxury of staying at a safe distance. And it's really important to remember that what this comes down to is you're not doing it for yourself. As we know, this virus is carried through people who may be asymptomatic. They're not experiencing any discomfort. They may have no idea that they're carrying it. But they may also be coming into contact with people who are much more vulnerable than themselves, people who will be impacted and who will fill up our emergency rooms and hospital beds and take up the equipment that we might need for other people. So don't think of it as doing it for yourself because everybody wants to be a hero. This is not the time for that. This is the time to think about the other people in our community who you may be coming in contact with. Your coworker who may have to go home to their baby, or your colleague who may share a home with their elderly mother. That's who we're looking out for.
Yeah, I know I could speak for myself and all my friends that we miss the gym, but we're doing it for grandma and the immunodeficients out there.
Exactly. Well said.
Yeah. I thank you for everything. I always have 2 exit questions going forward. The first one would be, the year is 2030. What do you see the status of Vegas in the ecosystem?
Well, that is a good question. I can tell you what I hope it'll be. I hope we continue to have that small town mentality and small town personality while still having all the amenities of a world-class destination. That's something I feel strongly that we have now, and I hope will continue to thrive. I hope that we continue to evolve and to diversify. I think there's room we have a very creative workforce here, and I think we're ripe for the opportunity to allow them to expand and explore everything, all of their capacity and potential. And I could see us continuing to do that and continuing to modernize. And nowhere does it better than Las Vegas when it comes to evolving and continuing to thrive. We, like others, I grew up here and I saw the evolution from the family days of the 90s to the exciting times of the nightclub industry to world-class food and beverage destination that people come to from all around the world. So I think we will do that again. It's yet to be seen exactly how we transform, but I have no doubt we will continue to do that.
Yeah, we were just on pace. I think sports and the takeover as the #1 convention destination is inevitable for Vegas, and I'm excited to see that. And then the last and most meaningful one is, what does Las Vegas mean to you?
Well, it's home for me. It's a place where you can have my former boss, the congresswoman, used to always say, it's a place where you can have a crazy idea in the morning, and by mid-afternoon, you have a bunch of people on your side helping get it done. And we really have that sort of flexibility, entrepreneurial spirit, and it's a place where I think people will continue to come together to make great things happen.
Vegas is home. Michael, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, my friend. It's good to see you.
Before we go, can you just tell everyone how they can follow you, interact with you, and get involved with the campaign?
Thank you so much for asking. It's Michael Naft, NAFT.com. It's at Michael Naft on Twitter and Michael Naft LV on Facebook.
Hey, you guys heard it here first on the Guest List podcast. Michael, thank you for everything, and have a good day.
Thank you so much, Jay. Good to see you.